Listen, all I'm saying is that you murdered Wilkins. You have to bring him back to life. I don't know. You've got the Necronomicon. Make it happen. Listen, I don't care how many virgins have to die. I can't do without my valet. Do you want me trying to put my own clothes on every day? I'm not even wearing pants, and it's all... Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for another video, where today we talk about my reading projects. You see, in some comments on my channel and even on some other videos, some other content creators have been mentioning how I have a lot of reading projects going on, possibly too many, possibly so many that it's ridiculous, which is absurd. There's nothing ridiculous going on my channel, never. So, let's talk today about the reading projects that I do have going on and how there are not too many of them and it's not ridiculous at all. No, it's all very manageable. And in fact, I had Roger write them all down on this handy tablet. Anyway, he wanted to put them on a scroll, but we didn't have any papyrus around today, so we had to put it on this little paper tablet. It's not like a tablet. Anyway, the main project, of course, the biggest thing going on this channel is the 500 book challenge, the challenge where I have to read 500 books that I already own before I will actually go out and buy any new ones. I can't buy new books, at least not for myself. I've bought some books for other people, but for myself, no. I have to deal with the thousands of books that I already have. So that's the main thing. And the second thing, this is not a list of my reading projects. This is just a bunch of blood spatter. What? Anyway, at the on the 500 book challenge, I am on book 120. I finished Captain Blood, and that was book 120. Now I'm reading another book, which I have sitting right here, and which I'll talk about in a minute. But on my channel, let's just, this won't be a long video, just mentioning some projects going on. So I have some projects, and there are a couple projects that are retired. I retired these projects. One of them was the read every issue of challenge, where I was going to read every issue of the X-Men. That challenge was retired fairly early on. I did that at the same time I came up with my read every book by challenge, which is still going on as far as Stephen King is concerned. And that is my Stephen King, read every book by Stephen King. Okay, so this is probably the oldest challenge on the channel at this point, because I started this in early days. I think it was pretty early days of my channel. I spun a wheel to see which author. I had a bunch of viewers suggested a bunch of authors, and one of the authors suggested was Stephen King. So I spun a wheel and I got Stephen King. And so now I have to read every book by Stephen King. And I've been doing it very, very slowly because, I've got some other things going on. And there was like 6 months where I didn't read any Stephen King at all. So I'm reading them in publication order, and I'm still only in the 80s. At least I got through the 70s, and I'm in the 80s right now. And this is Skeleton Crew, which is the next Stephen King book I have to read. This is an anthology of short stories. And it is how many pages long? It's 573 pages long, which is not bad for a Stephen King book. Stephen King books can be pretty darn long. So this is what I'm at next. And I'll probably start this at the end of this month. And I'll read this partially for Horror Mayhem, which is a reading event coming up about horror and reading short horror fiction. So yeah, Skeleton Crew, the next book in my Stephen King Read Every Book by Challenge, which is still going on. It's just going on slowly, slowly. Having a lot of reading challenges going on at the same time. It's like trying to read a lot of books at the same time, how it takes longer to finish the book because you're reading other books. Same thing with reading challenges. Yeah, same thing. Now, as far as reading every book by, I'm also doing a read every book by for Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I remember how I was originally going to do this is I was just going to read every book written by Edgar Rice Burroughs in publication order, all in a line. But that of course is impossible because I'm on BookTube and I have to read a bunch of other stuff. So this is the next book. This is The Oakdale Affair, which I do not remember at all. So I don't know if I actually read it the first time I read all the Edgar Rice Burroughs books. Of course I read, Tarzan and Mars and Venus and all that cool stuff when I was a younger person, including a bunch of his non-series novels. But I don't remember The Oakdale Affair too much, if at all. It has this Frank Frazetta cover of a giant bear, so it's got to be cool, right? So this is the next Edgar Rice Burroughs book I have to read, The Oakdale Affair. So I am continuing on with this. Now, we do have some other stuff going on. There is Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. Every month, Roger will pick a cheap old book for our book club. In fact, every book can be gotten for free on Project Gutenberg because it's all in the public domain. So every month, some strange, vintagey classic that possibly you've never heard of, but maybe you have. Every month, we'll read a cheap old book. And the last book was Captain Blood, which was fantastic, by Raphael Sabatini. And the next book, which is sort of appropriate for horror mayhem, is The Beetle by Richard Marsh. The Beetle by Richard Marsh. Which came out at the same time that Dracula came out. It's another horror novel with a creepy monster, although quite a different one. And in some ways, the monster in this is even creepier than Dracula. Although the book isn't as good as Dracula, I don't think. It's still a pretty good book. I have read this before, but it's been many, many years. So almost time to read The Beetle by Richard Marsh. So this is one of my other projects going on. See, not too many, just a few. Just a few. Okay. Also, in the world of comic books, I know everybody loves when I talk about comic books. I do have 2020 Thor is still going on, where I'm going to read every issue of Thor from the first run of Thor, which started in the early 1960s. The first run of Thor ended in the mid-90s. I think it was 96. Might have been 95, but I think it was 96. I am at 1983 right now. So reading every issue of Thor. Now, this is part of a greater project, which I will talk about in the near future on a separate video. But basically, I'm going to be reading I'm going to be reading the first run of every major Marvel character. The Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Captain America. I'll be reading thousands and thousands of issues of comics. And it's going to take a long, long time. It's part of my Marvel master plan. And I'll be doing it until I'm in my 60s, which is fine. I'll be happy to be reading Marvel comics into my 60s. But I started with Thor, and Thor continues. Thor continues. So doing that. Now, there is another comic book related project. I know, you're saying this isn't too many projects. This is easy money. There is another comic book project going on, or I just started it a while ago, but I just didn't tell anybody because I figured everybody's going to be like, damn, Michael's got too many projects. What an ass. Which sort of happens, which is why I'm making this video. Anyway, there's another project having to do with comic books and Conan. I just picked this up randomly because I had it sitting over there. I am reading... This is my quest to read every single Conan comic book. Every single Conan comic book in existence. Every single Conan comic I'm going to read. This is just a random one. This is Conan the Adventurer #3, which came out in the 1990s. This was the follow-up series to Conan the Barbarian after Marvel inexplicably canceled Conan and then just brought out another Conan comic book. Who knows? Anyway, right now I'm at the very beginning of, I think I'm halfway through the first Conan epic. No, I'm halfway through the first Conan omnibus from Marvel Comics. So I've got a ways to go, but I'm going to be reading every single Conan comic book. See, that's not too crazy. That's not too crazy at all. I also have another project which just sort of happened. I've been enjoying some classic fantasy stuff, recently. I read the Anubis Gates, and right now I'm in the midst of reading the Great Book of Amber. I've got 3 books left on this. I also read The Broken Sword recently by Poul Anderson. So I am doing, and this is part of it, retroactively, my classic fantasy project where I'm going to be reading a bunch of classic fantasies. Starting, I guess, with the Great Book of Amber, with the Amber books. But I'm going to be reading a bunch of other classic fantasy stuff, Lord Dunsany, Gormenghast, all kinds of old stuff, which I'll talk about in a video in the near future. That's not too many projects. Oh, and I also think once a month, I'm going to try to be reading a Robert E. Howard book because he is my favorite writer. And I'm decided to read all of the Robert E. Howard library volumes. I'm reading this one right now, and it's completely awesome, from the 90s, Cormac Mac Art by Robert E. Howard. So I'm doing that. I'm doing that as well. And there are the events, though. So I've got those going on, but there are events like Horror Mayhem. These are events, booktube events are kind of like mini projects. I've got Horror Mayhem coming up where we read shorter horror fiction or horror fiction. Then June on the Range, where we're reading Westerns. We're going to be reading Westerns in June for June on the Range. Then we've got Rocket Summer in July, which is science fiction, classic science fiction. Then August is Garb August, the greatest reading event of all time, where we read trashy fiction. And then we've got Sumerian September coming up, where we read Conan, and every year we read Conan, and this year it's Conan pastiche fiction, and I've got all of those Else Brad DeCamp, Lynn Carter nonsense pastiche books to read. And then starting in October, I have to read Varney the Vampire, the gigantic Penny Dreadful, which this time I'm going to read the whole thing. I did make an attempt at Varney before, but I only read half of it. And now I'm going to read the whole thing, starting in October. Oh, and then, see, this isn't too bad. This isn't too much. This is perfectly manageable. And then in December, it's December in Dunwich, where we read every single H.P. Lovecraft story in December. See? Easy money, no problem at all. This is all, and I read super fast, so I don't, actually. So this should be no problem. It's no problem. See? I don't have too much going on. No.